What are the caveats? Are there any caveats or precautions that you need to take when you're building a modular?
I mean, look, there are limitations, just like any system, right? I mean, our system is relatively adaptable, but there are also sort of utilizing our system has some requirements, some parameters, and breaching those parameters potentially loses sort of cost and time value for the developer. So early on, you have to have the conversation about like, is this something I can live? Like, are the parameters and the limitations something I can live with, or do I just need free range and I'm going to sculpt whatever I want out of this space? And if you want to do that, it can be amazing, but it's not necessarily valuable as a modular solution. Almost anything can be built modularly. The question is there a value proposition to building it? Time, cost, quality, safety, neighborhood disruption, all those things that it does very well.
Is a value prop in favor of modular or not? Usually, typically.
Well, it depends on the system and what it is. So, for instance, mid-rise to high-rise multifamily buildings, you're almost always going to get a value proposition for a modular building. Office buildings with large column-free spans, really hard to build a modular building. Hospital beds, small operating rooms, really easy to build modularly. But large, operating theaters, it's got some challenges associated with it. So, I mean, it sort of depends on what you're building. But it's the first conversation before anybody wastes anybody's time is, what are you trying to do? And is it likely that our solution, and there are, by the way, modular is a strange word because it's not well defined, right? We're volumetric, steel volumetric modular manufacturers. There are lots of things called modular that may be a good fit for it, or it may be a horrible fit. It just may not work.
Do you think it will grow as a market?
It is growing as a market. It has to grow.
And adoption rates?
It is good and getting better every day. Once money isn't free, the time that it takes to build something has a huge value proposition. When money's free, it doesn't matter, right? I mean, when money's free, if I could sit on it a year or 2 years or 3 years, you're only worried about meeting a market condition. You're not worried about the cost of the money that you're borrowing. Now, paying 7% or 8% or 10% interest, that people pay attention.
So modular is faster.
Modular done right is faster. Yes.
It's faster. By how much? 10%, 20%?
No, should be a minimum of 30% faster.
Wow.
Should be a minimum
faster.
Up to 50%. Wow. And that's in the design and construct side, not just the construct, but design and construct, it's going to be 30% faster. And with some repetition, economies of scale, 50% is not a big stretch.
Are there certain areas or cities around the country that are adopting this more than others?
You could imagine, right? I mean, it's so we're a dense urban environment solution, so you can guess the cities that are interested in it, right? Atlanta, Baltimore, New York, Boston, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Denver. You can imagine where people go up because it's efficient and are open to going up. That is where our market sort of is growing, but the industry is growing all the time.
Do you guys operate in all of these cities?
Not Denver at this point, but we have an East Coast factory and a West Coast factory.
How about housing as single family house? Look, it is a market. It is absolutely a market, and it's absolutely a need. But our system doesn't really, other than sort of an ADU that you could drop off just about anywhere you want, it doesn't really fit our system and process. But why not?
How much time do you have?
You're a quick talker. I mean, you're blazing through your thoughts really quick.
Yeah, so. Not hard for me to do this. But So if you think about the value proposition of building something offsite, the value proposition is that you could build it with very tight tolerances, approaching sort of micron manufacturing process, and you can assemble it quickly, high quality, protected, et cetera. And the challenge or the potential value, the diminished value, comes from the interface of the things that you're manufacturing and how they're working on site. And so, in other words, how they're interfacing on site. So if you imagine a single family house that's not a ranch, you're not in Venice, California. It's not a ranch. It's 2-story colonial. The stairwells, the open spaces, all those things move scope of work from the factory to the site. And wherever you have factory work and on-site work in the same place, the value of the factory work is diminished by the on-site work having to interface with it. So that's one of the things. The other thing is that construction tolerances on site are never the same as we can build in a factory. We are far more accurate. So now imagine that I have a perfectly square or perfectly rectangular room, plumb square to itself, and also completely built to theoretical, because if you're building offsite, you have to build to theoretical. Now it's showing up on site, and the concrete guy, who's a pretty good concrete contractor, pours the foundation with its normal, no more than 3 inches in 100 feet or whatever, whatever the spec is. So now on a planar basis, you can adjust for that. Like, our system has a way of adjusting for the inaccuracies of a foundation as it relates to picking up the mods. We have embeds that we put into concrete or can attach to steel, so we can adjust. But now imagine you're trying to do that in multiple locations in a house that is not just on planar, but 3-dimensionally. So now this wall has to meet that wall, and this is built conventionally, and this is built modularly, and now all of a sudden it's like this. Now what do you do? And so that's what gets created when you're sort of, to use an art term, mixing mediums, right? If you're mixing mediums, it's a very different process. So you want to design the interface to be effective. So, for example, in our buildings, the hallways are absolutely built in the factory. The finishes aren't, because we want to attach the mechanical and electrical, plumbing, structural distribution in that space. And then applying the finishes is a piece of cake, right? We're just providing all the and it's already built. But if we were having to, say, pour a concrete hallway and hope that the mods attach to it, you can imagine sort of the potential risks and inefficiencies in that process. I don't know if that was helpful, but that's sort of how
it was. Actually very helpful.
Okay.
I appreciate you taking the time to explain it to us. But then there has been numerous reports. I remember coming across one of them lately that shows, I don't know exactly how the process works. You'd probably help me understand that. But then they're using like literally building blocks, just like Legos. They're made out of some resin, chemical.
Oh yeah, I did see those. I saw.
Yeah, you saw them. So what is that? Is that something that you guys also manufacture or aware of, or?
No, I mean, I'm completely aware of it. There were plastic, basically Lego blocks that created structure, and they were fully insulated, et cetera. I mean, that's not our world, right? We're mid to high rise, so we're going to build a steel box. We're going to put a facade on it. The facade's going to have, good sustainability elements, as passive as sort of you'd like to achieve. But like, we're not building the foundations generally. We're just waiting. You give us something to sit on, and then our mods are everything all the way up to the parapet. But that's in a building, a mid to high rise building mostly. So we don't. I do watch, because I'm a bit of a geek. I do like to watch all of the new technologies coming out, and like to see how it's evolving. I like to watch 3D printing of house panels. I like to watch 3D printing of materials. I like to watch new innovative mechanical systems that are, sort of thinking about modular as a use case. So yeah, you have to stay aware of all those things because there is a lot of innovation.
I need to pick your brain here, Roger, as a specialist on more nationwide issues and challenges we're facing today. And housing is a dire crisis, as it seems to be, and will continue to be for the next decade at least, if not more. Some of the guests on the show said they don't see.
Yeah, that is, I hope so. I hope you're right. I hope it's 10 years. I don't think it's 10 years, but
it's more, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, everyone, all the guests that came here had one thing in common, which is they all said that's not something, we're not going to come out of it in the next 20, 25 years, not even in 20.
It would be nice to make a dent, though. It would be nice to have the need shrinking rather than expanding, for sure.
That's what I have. Two questions for you. First of all, how did we get to this? How did we come to where we're at now? And how do we come out of it if we are to expedite whatever needs to be done?
Yeah. So how do we get here? I think it's not that complicated, right? The reality is that we have done a bunch of things worldwide that are interestingly antithetical to housing for all, right? The wealth disparity in the world everywhere, including the United States, is huge, and the result of that is you have I have many people, and not in our industry, but I have many people who I think are very, very smart, sort of anthropologists, and they're, the result of that wealth disparity really has basically eliminated the middle class. And the middle class had always been eliminated in South America and certainly in places like India, which is now a huge economy. So what happens is you create these economic donuts where the place that you can find work is very far from the actual place you can afford to live, and that's getting bigger and bigger, right? So you're asking how we got here. Like we've been getting here for this is not over 5 years. This is over, a long time. So on top of it, our industry are slow as can be. When you think about, just talk to anybody anywhere in the world. It doesn't matter where you are. I have a project and I can't get this, the city state to get me a permit. I can't get financing. The building department won't delete it, or, I've been holding the land for too long and now that, the project's upside down, or, I could go through every story under the book and everybody has one, and that's just not efficient. Right. And then I'm going to sort of add on to it. And then the methodology that sort of have been created in the United States to create affordable housing is even more inefficient, right? So they, to think about taking 4 years to build a 200-unit project for, attainable housing is absurd. We all know it doesn't take that long to build, right? So now people are still having children, and the population's still growing, and the economies are shrinking. Economies are shifting. If you just look at the United States, we could look at any country you like, but if you look at the United States, like we have invested as a country billions and billions of dollars into creating manufacturing capacity, right? All over the country, chips and, all kinds of manufacturing, wind farm products, et cetera. Those areas they're getting built, there's no housing. So why does it matter that you have a $40 billion factory in X location if you can't build housing to house the people, and they have to live like 3.5 hours, even if they're making double their salary, if they have to live 3.5 hours from where forget it, it's not going to happen. So we just somehow have disconnected sort of the need for shelter from everything else going on in the economy. That's my view, like that.
You're running for elections.
No, but it bothers me.
I want to elect you. You have my vote.
It bothers me. It makes no sense. It's just, and by the way, it's not economically a good model, right? I mean, if you think about early US settlements, you can go to all kinds of railroad locations in the United States, and you can see all these old company towns, or basically when the steel industry, before it was the Rust Belt, I grew up in the Midwest, there were people moved to the town because they could work in the steel mill, or they could work in, some fabrication, or they could do mining, or they could do farming, or whatever. Like that was how you ended up living where you live. Now we're mobile, but the reality is that you can't really go buy a house near the next Intel plant because there's no housing there. So we have to create it.
It hurts.
It does hurt. It does
hearing
hurt.
You talking about this and
it does.
Thinking
it's
about
painful.
Kids is just.
It's painful. It's painful.
Oh gosh.
And it's the problem is that we are innovative beings that have capacity to solve problems. The one thing that's interesting is to see how sort of the developer role, whether that be public-private or public-private partnership, how the developer role needs to shift and incorporate the needs of the end user in a way that is valuable to the end user rather than valuable to the middle and to the middle of the process. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of reckoning that we have to do as an industry, and embracing solutions and figuring out how to work with them, I think, is incumbent on us as an industry, I think.
Roger, what's the solution? Aside of the political aspect and the economic aspect, which is, I don't know how you can even come up with a solution without these two ingredients really in the mix. But then I don't see the political establishment moving or doing anything, not even barely enough, not even scratching the problem here. Nope. They're turning their face completely away from it. I mean, we're at the footsteps of a presidential election. I haven't heard any of the candidates talk about how they're going to really address this challenge or problem. They talk about everything in the world, everything in every corner of the world, except the problem here at home, right? It's mind blowing. But then, if we were just to talk strictly from an engineering practical, and you're a very, very practical gentleman, from a practical standpoint, how would you solve a problem at hand like this?
So I actually think there needs to be a new alignment. I'll tell you what I mean by that, but I think there needs to be a new alignment in order to create housing, right? So we have for long relied on a system. And by the way, there are a bunch of different countries that have different systems to create housing, and some of them are doing better than us. I'm not saying any are succeeding greatly, but some are doing better than us. But we need to think about the roles of who is going to be in the development process for the housing that's needed. For example, like if I was just talking about factories, right? So in the factory creation, you have the people running the factories. They have a huge incentive to get people to get housing that is actually proximate to where they're living. And the local jurisdictions have a huge incentive to create housing so that the families live and spend their money there. And the workers, whether they be union workers or affiliated workers or just consortiums of what do you call them? Chambers of commerce. So all those groups need to rethink about what they can do to be part of that solution. Now, some of them, for instance, teachers have huge pension funds, right? So is there something they could do using their pension funds, make money as a provider of some portion of the stakeholders, debt or equity or whatever it is? Can they do something that is going to both economically benefit them as a teacher, et cetera, but also benefit the jurisdiction which needs all of that input? Like you can't build a factory and have 100,000 people move there to do it and not have needs for schools and needs for fires. Like you need all that stuff. So we just have to rethink how, what the roles that each of these groups play to create the housing. And then we have great solutions on how to actually create the built environment. And they're radically efficient and predictable, right? They're not perfect, but they're radically predictable and efficient. So we could say you could have this much in this much time,